Don't eat me, human! The squeaky voice rang out from somewhere in the kitchen, startling Alex so badly that he nearly dropped the pan he was holding. He froze, scanning the empty counters and the dim space beyond the kitchen island. Had his exhaustion finally driven him to hear things? "Hello?" he called, his voice tentative. No response, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain against the window. Then he spotted it, a flash of movement near the fruit bowl. His eyes narrowed and he edged closer. Was it a mouse? A bird? But as he leaned in, what he saw defied every rational explanation. A tiny figure, no more than 6 inches tall, peeked out from behind a banana. The creature had wide, luminescent eyes and delicate, translucent wings that quivered like hummingbird feathers. Her skin shimmered faintly, a bluish hue that seemed to pulse with light, and she wore a tattered outfit made of strange, leaf-like material. She was unmistakably alien and trembling. Alex blinked. Then he blinked again. He had seen enough sci-fi movies to know that this moment demanded a reaction. Unfortunately, his brain decided the best response was, hi? The alien girl gasped and pointed a tiny, glowing object at him. A weapon, perhaps. It looked like a toy, but the energy crackling around its tip suggested otherwise. "Don't come any closer," she squeaked, her voice high-pitched but commanding. "I mean it, human. Stay back or I'll vaporize you." Alex raised his hands, still clutching the pan in one. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not gonna hurt you." The alien hesitated, her grip on the weapon faltering. "Liar. All humans are predators. You'll eat me the second I let my guard down." "Eat you?" Alex's voice rose an octave. "Lady, I don't even eat sushi, let alone whatever you are." Her glowing eyes narrowed. "Promise?" "Promise," Alex said, lowering the pan. "In fact, I'll even... Wait, are you seriously hiding behind a banana right now?" The alien bristled, stepping out from her hiding spot. "It's a strategic position. I was observing your feeding rituals." "Feeding rituals?" He frowned, glancing at the untouched sandwich on the counter. "You mean making a grilled cheese?" "Precisely," she said, raising her chin. "And I know what happens next. You devour your prey without mercy." Alex stared at her, trying to decide if this was the weirdest dream he'd ever had or if he was officially losing it. Either way, one thing was clear. The tiny alien in his kitchen was terrified of him. Before we dive deeper into the chaos, take a moment to think. What would you do if you found a 6-inch alien accusing you of being a predator? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Who knows? Maybe next time, we'll figure out if aliens also think humans are good at dancing. Alex sighed, rubbing his temples. "Okay, look, I don't know where you came from or why you think I'm gonna eat you, but I swear, I'm harmless." She studied him, her luminous eyes scanning his face. "You don't look harmless. You're gigantic and loud." "Well, you're tiny and paranoid," Alex shot back, then winced. "Sorry, that was rude. Can we start over?" The alien girl hesitated, lowering her weapon slightly. "Fine, but no sudden moves." "Deal." He crouched down slowly, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "So what's your name? Or do you even have names where you're from?" Her wings fluttered nervously. "I am Tira, scout of the Glimari people, and I am stranded on this primitive planet because of circumstances." "Right," Alex said, raising an eyebrow. "Circumstances like crash landing in my kitchen?" Tira bristled. "It wasn't a crash. It was an emergency descent, and your atmosphere is to blame. It's..." She paused, her glowing eyes darting toward the window. "Wait, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Alex asked, straightening. Tira darted to the edge of the counter, her wings twitching. "Something's coming. Something big." A low rumble vibrated through the floor, growing steadily louder. Alex frowned, setting the pan down. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, a blinding beam of light flooded the room, pouring through the window like a spotlight. Tira yelped and dove behind the banana again, clutching her tiny weapon. "Alex," she hissed, her voice shaking. "They found me." "Who's they?" Alex demanded, shielding his eyes. Tira's face emerged from behind the fruit, her expression grim. "The people who want to take me back. And trust me, human. They're far worse than you." The blinding light shifted, sweeping across the kitchen like a search beam. A sharp, mechanical hum vibrated through the air, accompanied by a sound Alex could only describe as a low, ominous drone. "What is that?" Alex whispered, his voice tight with panic. Tira didn't answer. She was busy fiddling with her glowing weapon, which now emitted a series of frantic beeps. Her wings fluttered erratically as she muttered under her breath in a language Alex didn't understand. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression both fearful and resolute. "They're here," she said. "We need to move, now." "Move?" Alex sputtered. "Move where? You're like 6 inches tall, and I'm pretty sure they just lit up my entire house with some kind of alien floodlight." Tira's glowing eyes narrowed. "Do you want to be vaporized? Because staying here will guarantee it." That got his attention. "Vaporized? Whoa, hold on. Vaporized by who or what?" She pointed her tiny weapon toward the window. "The hunters. They track runaway scouts like me. If they catch me, they'll reclaim me. And anyone who gets in their way." Her wings twitched. "Let's just say it doesn't end well." Alex's mind reeled. Just an hour ago, he'd been a normal guy making a grilled cheese sandwich. Now he was apparently harboring a fugitive alien while being hunted by extraterrestrial goons. Fantastic. "Okay," he said, forcing himself to take a deep breath. "Fine. Let's assume this isn't a stress-induced hallucination. How exactly do we escape? Do you have a plan? A ship? Anything?" Tira hesitated, glancing at her weapon. "My ship is compromised. But if we can reach a safe location, I can send a distress signal to my people." "And how far is this safe location?" Alex asked. "Far enough that we need to start moving," she snapped. "Preferably before they break down your walls." As if on cue, the mechanical hum outside grew louder. A series of rhythmic thuds echoed through the air, shaking the house. Alex's heart leapt into his throat. Whatever was out there, it wasn't messing around. "All right," he said, grabbing his keys off the counter. "Bye. You want to run? Let's run." Tira blinked. "You mean you're helping me?" Alex shot her a look. "What's the alternative? Sit here and wait to get vaporized? No thanks." For a moment, Tira just stared at him, her luminous eyes wide with something that looked like surprise, or maybe gratitude. Then she nodded. "Okay, let's go." Alex stuffed Tira into his jacket pocket, her indignant protests muffled by the fabric, and bolted for the back door. He flung it open and stepped into the rain, his sneakers splashing against the slick pavement. The wind howled, carrying the faint whine of something mechanical hovering overhead. "Where's your car?" Tira demanded, her voice muffled. "In the driveway," Alex muttered. "But if these hunters are as scary as you say, won't they just blast it off the road?" Tira poked her head out of his pocket, her wings fluttering. "Then we'll have to outsmart them. You humans are good at that, aren't you?" Alex nearly tripped over his own feet. "Not sure I love the implication there, but yeah, I'll do my best." They reached his car, a battered sedan that was more rust than metal, and Alex threw himself into the driver's seat. Tira scrambled onto the dashboard, her glowing weapon still clutched tightly in her hands. "Drive," she ordered. "Where?" Alex asked, jamming the keys into the ignition. "Anywhere but here." With a groan, the car sputtered to life. Alex slammed it into gear and peeled out of the driveway, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. Behind them, the searchlight pivoted, locking onto the car. A high-pitched whine split the air, followed by a searing bolt of light that barely missed the rear bumper. "Holy! What was that?" Alex shouted. "Warning shot," Tira said grimly. "They won't miss next time." Alex gritted his teeth, gripping the wheel as he swerved onto the main road. The rain blurred his vision, but he could just make out the faint, shadowy shapes of 3 hovering crafts in his rearview mirror. They were sleek and angular, their surfaces glinting with an eerie metallic sheen. Each was armed with what looked like glowing cannons which pulsed ominously. "This is insane," Alex muttered. "I'm being chased by alien death drones. This is my life now." "Focus," Tira snapped. "Keep driving. I'll handle them." "Handle them?" Alex shot her a disbelieving look. "You're the size of a doll. What are you going to do, throw a banana at them?" Tira glared at him, her eyes glowing brighter. "I'll have you know this toy is a highly advanced energy weapon capable of disabling." Her explanation was cut short as another bolt of energy streaked past the car, exploding against the asphalt just ahead. Alex swerved hard, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. "Less talking, more handling." Tira let out an exasperated squeak, but climbed onto the dashboard, bracing herself as she aimed her weapon out the windshield. A faint hum filled the air, followed by a sharp crack as she fired. One of the pursuing crafts wobbled, its sleek surface crackling with electricity, before spiraling out of control and crashing into the trees. "Not bad," Alex muttered, impressed despite himself. "Less sarcasm, more driving," Tira retorted. Another blast tore through the air, this one closer, sending sparks flying as it skimmed the side of Alex's car. He gritted his teeth, jerking the wheel to avoid the glowing debris littering the road. "Tira, whatever you're doing, do it faster!" he yelled, his voice tight with panic. "I'm working on it!" She snapped, her tiny hands fumbling with her weapon. Her wings quivered with tension as she steadied herself on the dashboard, aiming again. Another sharp crack split the air as her weapon discharged, striking the second craft's underbelly. The vehicle faltered but didn't go down, its sleek form shuddering as it pressed on. "They're adapting," she muttered, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. "Their shields are recalibrating against my attacks." Alex swerved hard to the left, narrowly avoiding another searing blast. The glowing beam struck a nearby lamppost, cutting it clean in half. Sparks rained down, illuminating the soaked asphalt in bursts of yellow and orange. "Great," Alex said through clenched teeth. "Any other brilliant ideas, or are we just going to play dodge the death laser all night?" Tira hesitated, then glanced at him. "There's a bridge up ahead, isn't there?" Alex blinked, his grip tightening on the wheel. "Yeah, so what?" "Drive under it. I can use the structure to create an interference field and temporarily disable their targeting systems. It'll buy us some time." "An interference field? How does that even—" "Never mind," Alex said, shaking his head. "We'll do it your way. Just don't let me regret this." The bridge loomed ahead, its steel beams gleaming faintly in the rain. Alex floored the gas pedal, the engine groaning in protest as the car sped toward the underpass. Behind them, the 2 remaining crafts closed in, their weapons glowing with lethal intent. "Get ready!" Tira shouted, bracing herself against the dashboard. As the car plunged into the shadow of the bridge, she raised her weapon high, a series of rapid beeps emanating from the device. A blinding burst of light erupted from the weapon's tip, flooding the underpass with an intense, crackling energy. The pursuing crafts faltered, their sleek forms shuddering violently as arcs of electricity danced across their exteriors. One of them veered off course, slamming into the concrete support of the bridge with a deafening crash. The remaining craft pulled back, hovering just outside the interference zone as its weapon systems flickered erratically. "Did it work?" Alex asked, his voice breathless as he guided the car back onto the open road. "For now," Tira said, her voice tight. "But they'll recover quickly. We need to keep moving." Alex stole a glance at her, his brow furrowed. "Okay, but let's be clear about something. Who are these guys, and why are they so hell-bent on catching you? What aren't you telling me?" Tira hesitated, her wings drooping slightly as her luminous eyes flicked toward him. "The hunters work for the overseers. They enforce the laws of my world and other worlds under their control. When someone breaks those laws, the hunters are sent to retrieve them." "Retrieve," Alex repeated, his tone skeptical. That's a nice way of saying hunt down and vaporize, isn't it? Her gaze dropped to the glowing weapon in her hands. I was sent here to observe your planet, to determine if humanity posed a threat to the Glimmari or the Overseer's larger plans. But when I saw what the Overseers intended to do with that information, I couldn't let it happen. Alex's stomach sank. What were they planning? Tira met his gaze, her expression grim. Invasion, subjugation, the complete dismantling of your world's autonomy. They see humanity as a potential rival, one that must be neutralized before it becomes too powerful. The weight of her words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. So you're telling me these guys are chasing you because you… what? Refuse to help them destroy us? Yes, she said simply. For a moment, Alex was silent, his mind racing. Then he let out a dry, humorless laugh. Great. So not only am I on the run from alien death squads, but I'm also stuck with the one person who's probably at the top of their hit list. Tira bristled. You could have left me behind. And let them turn my house into ground zero for an alien invasion. Yeah, no thanks. Before Tira could respond, a new sound cut through the night. The sharp, staccato whir of approaching engines. Alex's heart sank as 3 more crafts appeared on the horizon, their sleek forms slicing through the rain like sharks through water. They've called reinforcements, Tira said, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. Alex tightened his grip on the wheel. Fantastic. Any more brilliant ideas? Tira hesitated, then her wings fluttered nervously. There's one, but you're not going to like it. Try me, Alex said, his voice edged with desperation. We need to lose them in the forest, Alex blinked. The forest? You mean the one filled with mud, trees, and absolutely no roads? Yes, she said firmly. He let out a long, shaky breath. All right, forest it is. As the crafts closed in, their weapons glowing with deadly intent, Alex veered off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path. The car jolted violently as it tore through the uneven terrain, branches scraping against the windows. Tira clung to the dashboard, her eyes wide as the trees blurred past. Hold steady, she shouted. I'm trying, Alex shot back. Behind them, the crafts struggled to navigate the dense foliage, their sleek forms clipping branches and smashing through undergrowth. But they were gaining ground, their glowing weapons illuminating the forest in bursts of eerie light. Tell me there's a plan, Alex said, his voice tight. There's always a plan, Tira replied, her tone resolute. The forest closed in around them, the canopy above thick enough to obscure the rain, but not the ominous glow of the pursuing crafts. Alex gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled determination, his foot pressing the accelerator to the floor despite the car's violent shudders over the uneven terrain. Branches whipped at the windows, and mud splattered up from the tires, coating the car in a slick brown layer. Behind them, the hum of the crafts grew louder, their lights slicing through the darkness like the eyes of predators closing in for the kill. Tira clung to the dashboard, her weapon glowing faintly as she adjusted a dial on its side. Keep heading straight. There's a clearing up ahead. We'll make our stand there. Make our stand? Alex shot her a disbelieving look. You've got one tiny gun, and they've got, oh, I don't know, hovercrafts with death lasers. Do you have a better idea? She snapped, her wings fluttering in frustration. He bit back a retort, his jaw tightening as the first hints of the clearing came into view. The ground leveled out, giving way to a wide, open space surrounded by towering trees. It was a temporary reprieve from the dense forest, but Alex could already see the crafts closing in, their glowing weapons primed and ready. As the car skidded to a halt, Tira scrambled onto the hood, her tiny form braced against the wind. She raised her weapon high, its glow intensifying until it was nearly blinding. "What are you doing?" Alex yelled, shielding his eyes. "Drawing their fire," she said simply. Before he could argue, the first blast came, A searing beam of energy streaked through the clearing, slamming into the ground just feet from the car. Dirt and debris exploded into the air, raining down in a choking cloud. Tira fired back, her weapon emitting a sharp, crackling pulse that struck one of the craft's dead center. The vehicle shuddered, its lights flickering wildly before it spiraled out of control and crashed into the trees. "One down," she muttered, her voice grim. The remaining two crafts adjusted their formation, their glowing weapons locking onto her tiny silhouette. Another blast tore through the air, this one so close that Alex felt the heat of it against his skin. "Tira, get down!" he shouted, but she didn't move. Instead, she adjusted a setting on her weapon, the glow intensifying until it was almost unbearable to look at. With a final, determined cry, she fired. The resulting explosion was deafening, a shockwave of light and sound that sent the two crafts reeling. For a moment there was silence. Then the hum returned, low and menacing, as the remaining craft steadied itself. Its lights flared brighter, and Alex's heart sank as he realized it was charging for a final, devastating attack. "Tira, we need to run," he yelled, but she didn't respond. She turned to face him, her luminous eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or resolve. "You need to run. I'll hold them off." "Are you insane?" Alex shouted. "I'm not leaving you here." "There's no time to argue," she said, her voice firm despite its small size. "If they catch me, they'll track you too. Go, Alex. Live." The words hit him like a punch to the gut, but before he could respond, she fired again, the blast forcing the craft to veer off course. "Tira!" he yelled, but she was already moving, her tiny form darting toward the trees in a blur of glowing wings. Alex slammed his fists against the steering wheel, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to follow her, but the craft's weapon had locked onto her retreating figure, the glow intensifying like a predator ready to pounce. "Tira, you idiot," he muttered under his breath. His hands trembled as he yanked the gear shift and floored the accelerator. The car roared to life, skidding across the mud-slick ground as he veered straight toward the craft. If she thought he was going to sit back and watch her sacrifice herself, she didn't know him nearly well enough. The craft's targeting system wavered, its focus split between the fleeing Glimari and the sudden, reckless assault of a human in a battered sedan. Alex swerved hard to the right, narrowly avoiding another blast as it struck the ground where he'd been seconds before. "Tira!" he yelled, his voice straining to carry over the chaos. Her figure stopped in the distance, turning back toward him. Even from here, he could see the disbelief etched across her glowing eyes. She raised her weapon, firing a pulse that slammed into the craft's side, momentarily destabilizing it. Alex seized the opening, driving the car directly under the craft. He slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop, and leapt out, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the roar of the engines above. "What are you doing?" she shouted, darting toward him. "Saving your reckless glow-in-the-dark life," he shot back. The craft adjusted, its glowing cannons swiveling down to aim directly at them. Alex grabbed Tira and dove behind a fallen tree as the blast struck, sending shards of bark and dirt raining down around them. "We're out of options," Tira said, her voice trembling but resolute. "If I use my weapon's full charge, I can take it down. But the feedback might..." "Might what?" Alex cut in, his tone sharp. "It might kill me," she said quietly. He stared at her, his mind racing. "No, there's got to be another way." "There isn't," she said, her wings drooping. "This is what I'm trained for, what I'm supposed to do." "Bullshit," Alex said, his voice cracking. "You're not just some sacrificial pawn. You're you." Her glowing eyes widened, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade. "Alex," she began, but another blast cut her off, the force of it throwing them both to the ground. The craft loomed above, its cannon charging for the final blow. "No time for debates," Alex shouted, grabbing a heavy branch from the ground. "You do what you need to do, but I'm not letting you go out alone." She hesitated, then nodded, her small form glowing brighter as she raised her weapon. The air around her crackled with energy, the light intensifying until it was almost blinding. The craft's weapon discharged at the same moment Tira's did. The two blasts collided in midair, creating an explosion so massive it shook the ground beneath them. Alex was thrown backward, the breath knocked from his lungs as debris rained down. When the dust settled, the craft was a smoldering heap of wreckage, its sleek form now twisted and broken. "Tira," Alex croaked, his voice hoarse as he scrambled to his feet. He found her lying a few feet away, her tiny body dim and still. "No, no, no," he murmured, scooping her up carefully. Her eyes fluttered open, faint but alive. You're insane," she whispered, a weak smile playing at her lips. "Yeah, well," he said, his voice trembling. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." She laughed softly, the sound barely audible. Alex's heart pounded as he cradled Tira in his arms, her tiny form growing heavier with each passing second. The rain, now falling in heavy sheets, washed over them, but he barely noticed. His mind raced with panic, his thoughts a blur as he tried to make sense of the mess they were in. "Stay with me, Tira," he murmured, his voice shaky. "Just stay with me." Her wings fluttered weakly, but she didn't speak. Her breathing was shallow, and every small movement caused her to wince. Alex cursed under his breath, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The remaining crafts were still out there, and the forest offered little in the way of cover from whatever else might be lurking. His eyes darted back to the wreckage of the craft. It was a heap of smoldering metal, the once shiny surface now scorched black. But even as he thought they might have won, he knew the battle wasn't over. They hadn't just taken down a ship. They'd drawn the attention of everything around them. Tira's voice, faint but persistent, broke through his thoughts. "You need to run. They'll be back." "No," Alex said firmly, shaking his head. "I'm not leaving you here." She gave him a weak smile, her eyes half-lidded. "You don't understand. If they find us, it's over." "Then we fight," Alex said, his voice gaining strength. "We find a way to fight back." Tira's expression softened, but the concern was still there, buried deep in her tired eyes. "You're just a human." "Yeah. Well, you're a tiny alien who's supposed to be on the run, but here you are, saving my ass," Alex shot back. "I think we're both a little out of our depth here." A soft chuckle escaped her lips, and she winced. Alex carefully adjusted his grip, wincing when he saw the blood on her side. Her tiny frame was covered in bruises, cuts, and burns. "You're tough," he murmured, looking down at her, "but we need to get you patched up." Her wings fluttered in an almost imperceptible movement. "There's a place. It's not far. Safe, for now." Alex nodded, relief flooding through him. He had to move fast, but there was still a chance. He could get her to safety. They could survive this. With one last glance at the smoldering wreckage, he gently lifted her in his arms. The weight of her was nothing compared to the weight of the choice ahead. "Where is it?" he asked, pushing forward through the rain-soaked forest. "Left," Tira whispered. "Just past the next ridge. Follow the stream. They won't think to look there." The trees thickened around them as they moved deeper into the woods, the distant hum of more crafts filling the air. Each step felt like an eternity, but Alex pushed through, his focus narrowing to the path ahead. He had to keep moving. Tira's soft breaths were the only sound between them as he navigated the rough terrain, the rain continuing to pour down. Her presence, fragile and fleeting, reminded him that time was running out. He couldn't afford to fail. The stream she had mentioned came into view, a narrow ribbon of water cutting through the earth like a lifeline. "Almost there," Tira whispered. He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, but he could feel the pressure mounting with every step. The clearing was close, but so was danger. Every second they lingered in the open increased the risk that they would be discovered. They reached the stream's edge and Alex looked around, searching for any sign of the place she had mentioned. Tira's wings fluttered weakly, her hand grasping his shirt as if to steady herself. "There," she said, pointing toward a small opening in the trees. It was barely visible from where they stood, but as Alex's eyes adjusted, he saw the faint outline of a concealed structure, a hidden refuge. "Thank God," he muttered, pushing forward. As they reached the structure, Tira's grip on his shirt loosened, and she slumped in his arms. "You made it," she whispered. "I'm not letting you die out here," Alex said fiercely, stepping into the shelter. It was small, constructed from large rocks and tangled vines, barely large enough for them both to fit. Tira collapsed onto the ground as he gently lowered her, her breathing shallow but steady. Alex quickly scanned the space, his mind racing for anything that could help. "Stay with me," he said again, his voice urgent. Tira barely nodded, her eyes closing. Alex cursed under his breath, scanning the area for something, anything, that could stop the bleeding. He needed to do something. The pressure was unbearable. "Please," he whispered, almost to himself. "Please, don't leave me." A soft, fluttering sound from Tira's side made him freeze. Her eyes opened slightly, just enough for her to meet his gaze. "I told you," she said weakly. "I'm not going anywhere." Alex sat beside her, the weight of his frustration sinking deeper with every passing second. The silence between them was deafening, filled only with the distant hum of the alien crafts and the soft, steady rhythm of Tira's breathing. He had no medical supplies, no real plan, just an overwhelming sense of helplessness. But Tira wasn't helpless. Despite her injuries, her presence was a beacon of strength. It was her resolve that had kept them alive this long, and Alex realized, at that moment, that he couldn't let it all end now. Her eyes fluttered open again, and she managed a faint smile. "You're stubborn. I didn't think you'd get this far." "Only because you keep making me," Alex replied, his voice rough with emotion. Tira chuckled weakly, though it quickly turned into a cough. "I'm sorry," she rasped. "You didn't ask for any of this." Alex shook his head, leaning closer. "Stop. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. With you." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the rain falling outside and their shallow breaths. The fire from the wreckage of the craft had long since died down, but Alex felt the heat of the situation building again, as if the world outside was closing in. They had little time. Suddenly, a distant rumble cut through the air, low and ominous. The unmistakable hum of another ship. "Damn it," Alex muttered. "Not again." Tira's eyes flickered open wide, her body tensing in alarm. "They're already here." "Stay down," Alex whispered, pushing her further into the shelter. "I'm going to see if I can—" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm despite her condition. "I can fight." "You're in no condition to fight," Alex snapped back. "Let me do this. I'll draw their attention." "You won't make it," Tira said softly, her voice steady despite the pain she was in. "I can't lose you now." Alex hesitated, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. He wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion or the sense of impending doom, but something inside him broke. He wasn't about to leave her behind. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his words more forceful this time, as though his determination would somehow make it true. Tira's eyes softened and she sighed, too exhausted to argue. You really are impossible." The hum grew louder, closer. It was only a matter of time before they found the hidden shelter. Alex knew their only chance was to take action first. "Stay here," he said, more a command than a suggestion. "Don't move. I'll make sure they don't find you." He stood and moved toward the opening, peeking out through the narrow gap in the vines. His pulse quickened as he saw the silhouette of the ship through the rain. It was massive, its sleek form unmistakable against the backdrop of the darkened sky. Tira's voice stopped him before he could step out. "Alex, if they catch you, I'll be fine," he cut in, not turning to face her. "I've got a plan." But as he took a step forward, something inside him shifted. The doubt that had been lingering in the back of his mind, the fear that he wasn't strong enough to protect her, now gnawed at him in earnest. He had never been good with plans. He had been impulsive, driven by instinct. And yet in this moment, he realized that his only real plan, his only real weapon, was his connection with her. He couldn't face this alone. "Damn it," he muttered to himself. He turned back toward her, his voice low but intense. "If I don't make it back, you need to go. Get as far away as you can. Live." Tira's eyes widened and she tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Don't say that. I'm not leaving you, Alex." The ship grew louder. "I'm serious," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Promise me, Tira." She hesitated, then nodded, her face softening with a hint of pain. "I promise." Alex turned and dashed toward the gap in the vines, his heart pounding in his chest. Outside, the storm had intensified, the rain now coming down in sheets. The ship was so close now that Alex could hear the low growl of its engines, the mechanical hum that sent a chill down his spine. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement, any place to hide. The ship's shadow swept over the ground, casting a foreboding silhouette across the forest floor. He couldn't outrun it, couldn't outfight it. But there was one thing he could do. He could buy time. Taking a deep breath, Alex sprinted toward a large boulder near the edge of the clearing, using it as cover. His hands were shaking, and his breath was shallow. But he couldn't stop now. The fate of both of them rested on what he did next. He crouched behind the boulder, watching as the ship's shadow passed overhead. Then, without hesitation, he stood and fired, at nothing in particular. A loud, sharp burst of gunfire echoed across the clearing, followed by the blinding flash of his weapon's discharge. "Here!" Alex shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "Over here!" The ship's engines hummed louder, and a sudden, piercing light illuminated the area. They'd found him. The light from the ship's searchlights blinded Alex as he dove behind another cluster of trees, his breath ragged in his chest. The beam cut through the rain, sweeping over the forest floor with terrifying precision. He could feel the heat of it as it passed inches from his skin, but there was no time to hesitate. He rolled to the side, pressing himself flat against the damp earth, praying the ship wouldn't see him. The forest, dark and thick with rain, had always been his ally in hiding, but now it felt more like a prison, its shadows closing in as the light flickered over his hiding spot. A voice crackled through the ship's comm system, distorted but clear. "The target is somewhere nearby. Search pattern initiated." Alex cursed under his breath, scrambling to a crouch as the searchlights fanned out. He had to keep moving. He had to make it back to Tira. He could hear them now, footsteps, heavy boots sloshing through the mud. At least a half-dozen soldiers, maybe more. He didn't know how long he had before they realized he wasn't alone in the woods, but it wasn't long enough. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. It was a basic flare, a cheap emergency signal, but it would do the job. He yanked the safety pin, tossing it high into the air. The flare shot upwards with a sharp whistle, bursting in a cascade of bright light above the clearing. The soldiers' voices immediately rose in confusion, their footsteps halting. "What the hell was that?" one of them asked. Another soldier responded, "Did you hear that? Over there." Alex had only a moment. He sprinted to the right, ducking behind a large tree and using it for cover. The flare, bright and disorienting, had created just enough of a distraction. The soldiers were scrambling, confused, giving him the precious time he needed to get back to the shelter. He moved quickly, carefully, every step deliberate. His pulse was racing, but there was no room for hesitation. Tira needed him, and if he didn't get back to her soon, all of this would have been for nothing. Just ahead, the hidden shelter came into view, the rain still falling in sheets, the vines swaying lightly in the wind. Alex stepped carefully through the trees, the sound of footsteps and voices growing fainter behind him. He didn't stop until he reached the entrance of the shelter. "Tira," he called softly, stepping inside. She was there, exactly where he left her. But something was wrong. Her body was still, Too still. Tira's eyes were closed, her chest barely rising and falling with each breath. For a moment, Alex thought she was unconscious, but then he saw the blood on the ground, dark, thick pools that had spread around her. "No, no, no," Alex whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands hovered over her, unsure of what to do. The wound was deep. She hadn't just been hurt, she was dying. "Tira," he said again, louder this time, shaking her gently. "Please stay with me. Don't leave me." Her eyelids fluttered open slowly, her gaze unfocused at first. Then she blinked, her small form stirring as she shifted her weight. "You're back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," Alex replied, his voice breaking. "I'm here." Tira smiled weakly, her tiny lips curling up at the corners despite the pain. "You kept your promise." "Don't talk like that," Alex said, his voice desperate. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get you out of here." Tira shook her head gently. "There's nothing to fix, Alex." She closed her eyes again for a moment. "I've already made peace with it. I've lived a good life." "No," Alex said, taking her hand in his. "You can't give up now. We're getting out of here, together. You're strong. You—" Her eyes opened again, locking onto his with surprising clarity. I need you to promise me something. Anything. Survive. Live," she said, her voice growing weaker. "You have to keep going. You can't stop. I won't leave you, Tira. I won't let you die. Promise me." Her voice was barely above a whisper now, but there was a finality in it. Alex squeezed her hand, his eyes flooding with tears. "I promise." Tira's smile grew faint, her grip loosening in his hand. Then, "I'm okay." Her eyes closed one last time. "No," Alex shouted, his voice breaking. He shook her gently, desperate, but she didn't respond. Her small, fragile form remained still in his arms. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the rain as they fell onto her. She was gone. Alex sat there, numb. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as the weight of her absence settled over him. Her small body, so fragile, now lay limp in his arms. The world outside continued to rage with the storm, but inside there was only a hollow silence. He had failed her. He had promised to protect her, and now she was gone. The storm outside seemed to intensify, mirroring the chaos inside his mind. A blinding flash of lightning illuminated the shelter, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The sound of thunder followed, shaking the ground beneath him. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered now. Alex gently laid Tira down, his fingers brushing against her delicate skin one last time. He closed her eyes, trying to preserve the quiet peace that had been on her face in her final moments. But there was no peace in him. There was only the overwhelming desire for revenge. He stood, wiping the tears from his face, his fists clenched. The soldiers who had taken everything from him, from them, he would make them pay. Alex didn't care about the odds anymore. He didn't care if he was outnumbered or outgunned. They had taken the one thing that had given him purpose. And now, they would learn exactly how far he was willing to go to get it back. He grabbed his weapon from the corner of the shelter, his movements slow but deliberate. The ship was still out there, and its crew was still searching for him. But they weren't just looking for a lone survivor. They were looking for someone they could control, someone they could break. But they had underestimated him. He had no intentions of being anyone's victim. The rain continued to pour down in sheets as Alex slipped out of the shelter, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. The ship's lights were still sweeping through the forest, a constant reminder that they hadn't yet given up the search. But that was about to change. Alex moved silently, blending into the shadows as he made his way toward the wreckage of the ship. He could hear the distant voices of the soldiers, shouting orders to each other, but the urgency in their tone only fueled his determination. His feet moved faster, the adrenaline kicking in as he pushed forward. As he neared the ship, he crouched low, using the trees for cover. He could see the soldiers moving in and out of the wreckage, their eyes scanning every corner for any sign of him. He had to act quickly. With a quick glance at the position of the searchlights, Alex launched himself forward, his weapon in hand. The first soldier never saw him coming. A swift blow to the back of his head sent him crumpling to the ground. Alex didn't stop to check if he was alive. There were more. He kept moving, his steps quick and calculated, as he picked off the soldiers one by one. Each time, it was the same. A moment of surprise, a swift strike, and another soldier down. He was quick, he was relentless, and with each one that fell, the anger inside him began to fade, replaced with a strange calm. The ship's searchlight swung in his direction once more, but Alex had already positioned himself behind a large boulder, his heart pounding in his chest. The last of the soldiers was nearing the wreckage, unaware that his time was running out. Alex waited, holding his breath, his eyes locked on his target. Then, just as the soldier passed by his position, Alex leapt from his hiding spot, slamming his fist into the man's back and knocking him to the ground. The soldier struggled beneath him, but Alex's grip was unyielding. "This is for Tira," he whispered, before knocking the soldier unconscious. It was over. The remaining soldiers were either incapacitated or fleeing the scene, and the ship was now in his control. But Alex didn't care about the ship. What mattered now was that he had survived. He had avenged her. The storm had cleared by the time Alex stood at the edge of the wreckage, the moonlight casting a silver glow over the forest. He felt nothing but exhaustion, his body sore from the battle, and his heart heavy with the weight of his loss. But he had survived, and in that survival, there was still a glimmer of hope. For Tira, for her memory, for the future. Alex stood motionless, his breath steadying as the ship's wreckage smoldered in the distance, the fire now slowly dying down in the aftermath of his ambush. His mind was racing, but for the first time in hours, there was no more immediate danger, no more soldiers to fight, no more searchlights to evade. It was just him, alone, in the ruins. The cold night air bit at his skin, and his thoughts returned to Tira. Her soft voice, the warmth of her presence. Everything about her now felt distant, almost unreal. How had he let it come to this? The guilt weighed on him, heavy and unrelenting. But Tira had been right. She'd asked him to live, and he would honor her last wish, no matter what it cost him. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. Alex walked away from the wreckage, his mind locked on a singular goal. He would finish what he started, but he wouldn't do it alone. There was still the matter of the others, of the human race that had fought so hard to be free, to reclaim their place among the stars. But that place was no longer theirs alone, and Alex had a new purpose now. A purpose that, for the first time in a long time, made him feel something other than the numbness of loss. The air felt different in the next town. It was still early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon as Alex made his way through the deserted streets. The buildings, a mix of decayed remnants from past conflicts and newer constructions, spoke of a world in transition, a world still reeling from the chaos of intergalactic war and the human race's attempt to assert its dominance once again. But Alex could see it now, the cracks in the foundation of their power. He had learned much from his time in the woods, from the battles, from the pain. Humanity had been brutal, had been a force of nature, but that same brutality had also led to their downfall. They had lost their humanity along the way. They had lost the very essence of what made them worth saving. But he had a plan, and it was time to set it in motion. Alex had already located the resistance, a ragtag group of former soldiers and civilians who had grown disillusioned with the never-ending war and the oppressive power structures that had held them hostage for so long. They had the fire of rebellion in their hearts, and they were tired of fighting in vain. What they needed, though, was something more. They needed leadership. They needed hope. Alex had to be that hope. Weeks passed, and Alex worked tirelessly to rally the resistance, his plan taking shape. Every day, he met with key leaders, strategizing, planning. He didn't trust anyone yet, not fully, but he knew that this was the only way forward. The days of solitary survival were over. It was time to rebuild, time to honor the fallen by creating something stronger, something more united than ever before. The word spread fast as Alex's actions began to resonate through the ranks. People came to him, those who had lost everything, who had seen what humanity had become and were ready for change. They saw in him something they hadn't seen in themselves for years: hope. And that hope was infectious. The final confrontation came quicker than Alex expected. The remnants of the military had regrouped, and they were more organized than ever before. But Alex wasn't the same man he had been just weeks ago. He was sharper, more determined, and surrounded by allies who believed in his vision. The battle was brutal. The streets were filled with smoke, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air was thick with the scent of gunpowder. But Alex fought with a fury that surprised even him. The soldiers weren't the same either. They fought harder, with the desperation of those who had lost everything, but Alex could see it in their eyes. They had already lost. They were clinging to a dying ideology. This was the end, and Alex knew it. With one final push, the resistance broke through, pushing the remaining military forces to retreat. Alex stood victorious, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his brow. The battle was over. The war was over. But something was different now. The victory tasted bitter. There was no elation, no celebration, only the weight of what they had all endured and what they had lost. Alex stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching the smoke rise from the ruins of the military base. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that the war, the bloodshed, would never truly be over. There would always be those who sought to dominate, to control. But he had learned one thing in these last few weeks. They would never again let fear guide them. He had made a promise to Tira, and now he was making a new one. To the future, to humanity, and to the memory of all those who had fought and died for a better world. The war had changed him. It had torn apart everything he once believed, but in the end, it had given him something greater: purpose. And in that purpose, there was still hope. Alex stood alone, the winds of the battlefield cooling his sweat-soaked skin as he surveyed the horizon. The last of the enemy forces had been driven back, their command structures fractured and crumbling. The resistance, now emboldened and unified, began to gather their forces, ready to rebuild the world they had once lost. But even as the storm of war finally seemed to subside, Alex knew that there was more to be done. He'd come a long way from the heartbroken man who had lost everything. He had become a leader, a symbol of resistance and resilience. Yet there was still a hollow ache inside him, the memory of Tira never far from his thoughts. As he walked through the streets, now slowly coming back to life, he saw the faces of the people, the faces of those who had suffered and those who had been shaped by the chaos of war. They looked at him with hope in their eyes. Hope, not just for survival, but for something greater, for something more. Alex paused at the steps of an old, crumbling building, the remnants of the past standing as a testament to everything that had been lost. He looked down at the small symbol he had started wearing, a token of the promise he had made to Tira. A simple silver ring, forged from the debris of the destroyed ship. It had once been hers, and now it was his reminder that they were not just fighting for themselves, but for everyone who couldn't fight anymore, for those who had lost their way in the chaos of war. He closed his hand around it, feeling the weight of it in his palm, as the wind shifted and carried away the remnants of the storm. A new day was dawning, one not defined by fear, but by the will to rebuild, to create something that no longer relied on the old methods of violence and control. He would ensure that the mistakes of the past wouldn't define the future. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie, and he turned to see the leader of the resistance, a woman with fierce eyes and a calm presence, approaching. She smiled softly, understanding the weight of what he was feeling. "We've won," she said simply. Alex nodded, but his mind wasn't on the victory. It was on the journey that lay ahead. There would be no easy answers, no swift fixes. But together, they could change the world. Together, they could create something that would stand the test of time. "It's not over yet," Alex replied, his voice steady, a new resolve in his tone. "It's just beginning." He turned to face her fully now, his hand still clutching the ring. "The fight for the future is still ahead of us, but we'll make it right, for all of us, for those who came before us, and for those who will come after." The woman gave a slight nod, her eyes shining with a quiet pride. "You're right. It's time to rebuild." As they walked together, side by side, the weight of the past no longer seemed as heavy. Alex could see the light breaking through the clouds, the first true glimpse of dawn after the longest night. The world was broken, yes, but it was also filled with possibility, and that in itself was worth fighting for. The winds picked up again, not as a storm but as a sign of change, and as Alex stepped forward, leading the charge into an uncertain but hopeful future, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. The story of humanity would continue, but this time, it would be shaped by those who truly understood what it meant to fight, not for dominance, but for survival, for growth, for unity. And that was something worth believing in. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps the stories coming.